Hey there, guys, and welcome to episode 26 of the Unqualified Opinions podcast. I'm your host, as always, Marko. If you guys saw the We're Back video, you know that we're here and ready to make more content for you guys, and we're excited for that, but obviously the concern still at hand is the coronavirus pandemic, and what we will be addressing specifically is the impact it has had and will continue to have on the sports world. As you will recall, around mid-March, things in your life and everyone's life drastically began to change, including the things in the sports world. It began with the postponement of the NBA season, then the cancellation of March Madness, the MLB delaying the start of its season, and many other dominoes that have fallen and have yet to fall. There's still a lot of unknown, and from the coronavirus perspective, we are far from things being back to normal in our society, and I believe personally that things will not go back to normal until we have a vaccine. And I just believe that we are still a ways away from that. So what does this mean for the sports world? Well, it means the NBA concluding its season in a bubble in Disney World in Orlando. It means the MLB having a shortened season that may or may not finish, and it means for everyone, no fans in the stands for the time being. If we can view our world eradicating the coronavirus as a metaphor for climbing and conquering Mount Everest, then us hitting the peak of coronavirus cases and deaths is most certainly only hitting the peak of Everest, as everyone who's climbed Everest or even watched or read about someone climbing Mount Everest, you know that getting to the top of it is only half the challenge, as you have to climb all the way back down. And as a society, we haven't even reached the peak in coronavirus cases and deaths. So I don't believe that, we're going to be able to reach zero coronavirus cases and deaths without the help of a vaccine. And in the case of our metaphor with climbing Mount Everest, I suppose you could say that a rescue helicopter is our best metaphor for the vaccine and is our best chance of completely minimizing the effects of the virus and hitting zero. So I find it very difficult for us to be making such big decisions as these sports leagues are making right now without knowing all of the facts. And, we can do our best to minimize the spread of the virus, but like I said, without a vaccine, or in the case of our metaphor, climbing Mount Everest and getting a helicopter rescue, we will never get back down to zero cases. Now, obviously, we're not alone in this journey, as when you climb Mount Everest, you have fellow climbers and you also have Sherpas. In this case, the Sherpas in the metaphor probably being the measures that we can take to limit the spread of the coronavirus, that being social distancing, wearing a mask, and limiting social gatherings. But those Sherpas, they can only do so much. You have to get back down that mountain on your own eventually. And when it comes to sports and in the sports world, we know a lot of the decisions that are being made aren't, with the best interest of people's health and safety in mind when it comes to coronavirus risk. They're actually being made with money in mind. With something as severe as people's lives on the line, you wouldn't fathom the fact that money, would be the priority in their decision making. But it's quite obvious that, the NBA, the MLB, the NFL would not be playing seasons if money was not such a big factor in their decision making. Take, for instance, the NBA, which has spent $150 million on a bubble community down in Disney World in Orlando in an attempt to conclude their 2020 season and crown a champion. The amount of money at stake is enormous. And that's why we finally saw the MLB scrap together a 60-game season proposal. That is why the NFL will push forward and have a season. We don't know what it'll look like, but I can guarantee you that the NFL will do whatever it takes to have a season. And money is why we are having the discussion of attempting to even play amateur sports, collegiate sports, and putting the lives of young men and women at risk. I understand this is all uncharted water for everyone involved, and I understand that certain risks will need to be taken in order for the sports season to continue or resume. But we must keep in question the amount of risk we are willing to take to ultimately play something that is not essential. Because if this pandemic has taught me anything, and should have taught you anything, it's the real definition of the word essential. We may have had thoughts of what it was before this pandemic, but our perceptions of essential have certainly shifted now. Putting aside the debates as to whether sports are essential or not, and just saying that we should play sports because it'll be for the betterment of society, that people need something to look forward to and enjoy. Even with that in mind, we still cannot forget the enormous risk that we will be putting these players, the coaches, and all of the staff involved in running an operation as big as a sporting event. The complexity of this situation is unparalleled within the sports world, and we're seeing it all over the place in our current society, people grappling with what is essential. Now, I'm not saying I have all the answers, or that anyone for that matter has all of the answers, but I do believe that we should proceed with absolute and complete caution when dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. All right, next up, we've got our resident NBA expert, but he won't be talking a lot of NBA right now, as we'll just be kind of talking about the coronavirus's impact on our personal lives and the sports world. We've got Will Byerman on the phone. Will, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Marko. Really happy to be back working with you guys on the show again.
All right, so just tell me some personal experiences about losing sports during the pandemic and how that's impacted you.
Oh, it's been pretty difficult, actually. I mean, it really kind of made me realize how important sports actually were to my life. Like looking back to college, I would go to class all day, do homework and study till 5:30, and then I'd go to rugby practice. I'd work out every day. I'd go to rugby practice every other day. And then Wednesdays I'd go to the podcast with you guys. Really all I did was school, workout, rugby, podcast sometimes. And then in my downtime, like when I had 1 or 2 hours a night or every couple nights where I could just kind of sit down and enjoy myself, I'd be watching some basketball or just waking up in the morning and pulling out my phone and checking out the latest sports news on Bleacher Report or ESPN or something. But like, and they've all the websites have been putting out a lot of content, but there's not much to watch, and you're really reaching a point where they're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel on a lot of issues. So it's been pretty weird. Not just to have the sport I play get canceled, but I mean my main form of entertainment for my spare time was also taken away. So it's been pretty interesting. I didn't think I'd miss it as much as I actually ended up missing it.
Right, and obviously it's been hard on a lot of people not having sports, but we're starting to get to a tipping point, at least in some people's mind, that obviously some leagues are returning. The NBA, the MLB's trying, the MLS is having a tournament right now. But what are your thoughts on the prospect of kind of sports returning to its normal status of having fans in the stands and a full schedule and just being the way it used to be? What is your view on the prospect of that happening, and when do you think that'll happen?
It's really tricky to tell right now. I know MLS already has struggles with their tournament. I think FC Dallas and Nashville SC have both pulled out of the tournament, actually, because they thought they had too many cases on their teams, so they went home. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Major League Soccer tournament can actually conclude, and obviously very concerned about, we'll talk about that more in the next episode, but very concerned about how the NBA is going to be faring, because it's a pretty bold endeavor for them to do this bubble, and if it works, it's going to be a historically ingenious idea for bringing sports back to the American people. But if it does, there's a lot of potential for a lot of things to go pretty bad for the league. College football, I still have no idea where we're at there. NFL and MLB, we're just trying to go ahead. This is normal, which I think is a poor idea. I think I've heard that NBA Players Association already said that they're prepared to play this season and all next season without fans in attendance. So that's going to be pretty interesting to see where this turns up, because I really have no answer if you ask me when I'll get back to normal.
Right. Sports as we know it has kind of changed, and I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that until we have a vaccine, not only will sports not go back to normal, but I think everyday lives won't go back to normal until everything is 100% safe. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thanks, Marko.
We've got Paul Hires on the phone. Paul, how are you doing?
Well, I've had better summers, but for the most part, it's been going good.
All right, so Paul, why don't you just give me a rundown of, your experience with COVID as it relates to, sports being canceled or postponed.
Well, I tell you what, it really was, kind of terrifying when we first saw cancellations of events around the sporting world. And really the first thing that came up was the NCAA tournament and the fans. I know we were all together when we heard the news that the fans weren't going to be in attendance for the tournament, and then within 24 hours, pretty much all sports were canceled. So I think that was just kind of, as a sports fan and just being in this industry was kind of terrifying, not knowing what's going to happen and how everything's all going to play out, throughout the spring. And then it just kind of shifted to this, personal fear of just, is everything going to be okay? Is everything going to be normal? And, it was rough there for a few weeks without sports, but, I eventually was able to pick up other hobbies and be able to get through it. But yeah, it's been rough to say the least.
So just kind of moving on to, what are your personal thoughts on the prospect of the return of sports? Obviously, certain leagues and certain sports are at different points in their return process just based on where they were in their seasons before COVID. But what are your general thoughts on that?
Well, I tell you what, it's really a first for, everything happening at this point. I mean, we've really just never experienced a pandemic or really anything like this before. I mean, the last time, seasons were canceled were, you think the 94 MLB strike, and before that, some of these sports hadn't been canceled, since the World Wars were, a top priority. So you can just tell, first of all, just how great of an impact this whole pandemic is, just because of how much it has touched the lives of all these athletes and all these coaches. But on the prospect of the return, I think because it's something that nobody has seen, before, it's kind of hard to analyze and to try and find the best way to bring these sports back in the safest way for everyone. And so that's why I think there's a variance in these leagues and how they're trying to come back. I think personally, the NBA has kind of set a role model for how they've attempted to come back, right? You have all the players in quarantine and no fans, and you can kind of try and play the remainder of their season. But you look at a league like the MLB, and they just can't seem to agree on what they're doing. Quite honestly, I think the MLB is it's not going to be as enjoyable as a season as it usually is, and even if it does come back here in the next month or two, I just, I don't see it being a huge spotlight. As far as football goes, I think college football, the rate we're going, I just don't think there's going to be a season, quite honestly. And the NFL, there will be a season, but I think there's going to be, once again, a lot of precautions, probably no fans, and I'd say a start time for mid to late September for the NFL. It's, it's, once again, it's a sad thing to talk about, but, I think if you're putting the safety of the players and the coaches and everyone involved in these sporting events first, I think you just have to take those precautions. It'd be lucky if we had any sports at all, let alone, sports where everyone can be in attendance and what we would consider a normal sport. But yeah, I don't see the prospect of all of these leagues returning normally until at least 2021.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We really don't return to a normal state as a sports world or as a society until that vaccine comes into play. So, things will be different until then. I completely agree with you on the fact that the NFL is such a money-making machine that really, whatever the case may be, they will find a way to play a season. Obviously, the fans being in the stands is still, a contentious point amongst the owners, but they will come to a consensus on that. And I completely agree with you on the MLB. It's going to be less of an interesting product. And my thoughts on the MLB is, really, without a bubble, I think there's a 0% chance that the MLB finishes the season. And college football, I think it's an even worse of a prospect because you're talking about the same issues that the MLB is having, but also, fragmented decisions being made by the conferences on top of the fact that you're putting amateurs at risk. These aren't even professional athletes. So certainly all of the sports and the leagues themselves are in completely different, completely different spots. The NBA is probably the one in the best situation, already having the bubble and looking like they have a pretty decent chance of concluding their season. What are your thoughts on, where these different leagues are at, and also the idea of fans being in the stands really before we even have, answers as far as the health and safety of that situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think the fans and just the capacity. I mean, you talk about some of these football stadiums holding, 80 to 90, even sometimes 100,000 fans in their stadium. I mean, there's just no way you can spread those people out. And when it comes to this virus, it really has to do with the amount of time that you're around other people and the distance that you are from those people. And so when you've got, once again, 60 to 70, 80,000 people standing shoulder to shoulder for 3+ hours for a football game, that is just not safe. And as we've heard on the news, that's like a level 9 out of 10 risk of getting the virus and spreading the virus. And so if anyone in the stadium has the virus, I mean, that's just going to spread like wildfire. So once again, it comes down to the health and safety of everyone in the arena before, we play the game. And I think that's going to take the priority just away. And, as much as it sucks to have no fans in the stadium, that's just what it has to be. Personally, I'd rather, watch football on TV than just not have it at all because we can't have fans in the stadium. But yeah, just one more thing I want to point out is just, this virus has put so much impact. I mean, there is forever going to be an asterisk next to every, in every sports book, every record, stats, statistics on every sporting event. 2020 is going to have an asterisk next to it just because of everything that we've had to deal with this year and with the pandemic. And once again, it's a kind of a once in a lifetime thing that we're going through right now. And, just the fact that we're trying to figure out how to handle it while we're handling with it is just the reason why some of these leagues are going to take different approaches to trying to come back. And I think that all of the approaches that they're taking include 0 fans at the games.
Right. We are in uncharted water right now when it comes to how to deal with this situation. And I would hope that all of these leagues and sports have the health and safety of their players, fans, and all other people involved with it as their top priority. As I've been saying, when it comes to college sports, if money wasn't involved, it wouldn't even be a discussion having these amateurs playing. But you made a lot of great points as to how each individual sport and league will have to deal with this. Paul, thank you so much for coming on, and stay safe out there.
Yeah, you too, man. Have a good one.
All right, that is it for episode 26 of the Unqualified Opinion Sports Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comments section down below. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys next time.